Okay, I think we'll start without further delay. I'd like to welcome all of you to this official launch of the FEEDNETICS for the academia version. FEEDNETICS has been a very important project at Sparrows. We have been working on this software for the past 4 years, and we have launched last year versions for fish farmers and also for feed formulators working in feed companies. And now we are happy also to make it available for the academia people, for the research community at large. Again, I'd like to welcome all of you to the webinar that will be with you 1 hour today and 1 hour tomorrow. And I hope you will enjoy this webinar.
So, good afternoon to all. Good afternoon to all. I will start today with an overview of the FEEDNETICS concept. Luis will follow with illustrating how you can use FEEDNETICS with some selective use cases. And tomorrow we'll have Tomé Silva explaining a bit more details about the modeling behind the tool. And Felipe Soares will give us a live tour over the web app so you can have a grasp of how it really looks like. During the sessions, please use your Q&A button you have in your Zoom window and to type your comments, questions, and we'll address those at the second part of the webinar during the Q&A session. And so, without further delays, I'll start the overview talk. So FEEDNETICS is a virtual environment which you can use to evaluate aquafeeds and farming conditions. With this tool, you can predict growth, feed conversion, feeding costs, economic conversion, body composition, and waste emission related indicators. And it was designed for fish farmers. With FEEDNETICS, fish farmers can simulate and compare scenarios, namely different feeding regimes, different temperatures, among others. And based on the prediction results, they can quantify within a few minutes, hours maximum, production performance and savings on feed. FEEDNETICS is also targeted for aquafeed companies. With FEEDNETICS, aquafeed companies, and namely formulators, can evaluate formulation performance, diet screening to strengthen the rationale behind selection of the dietary treatments to test in trials, and of course to provide customer support. And today we are very happy to be launching the FEEDNETICS for the academic users. And with FEEDNETICS, you can complement your research about formulation performance, just like for the aquafeed companies, to strengthen the rationale. With FEEDNETICS, you can do a diet screening to strengthen the rationale about the dietary treatments that you will be testing in the trials. And of course, you can use it for trial planning and follow-up. And also, to support teaching activities. And these cases are for researchers working on nutrition, but FEEDNETICS can also be used in other contexts, because FEEDNETICS is a fish growth model that is based on a mechanistic simulation model that considers as inputs the feed quantity and quality and temperature, to simulate not only the growth, but also the fish composition, the oxygen consumption, ammonia and CO2 production, the wastes, and of course, feed conversion, economic conversion, and the feeding costs. So it can namely be used for researchers working on coastal ecosystems with aquaculture operations, namely for environmental assessments or ecosystem modeling. But because FEEDNETICS simulates in detail the fish growth, namely the effects of the amino acids in the growth and composition of the fish, it is an excellent tool for nutritionists. And currently we have available the FEEDNETICS for Gilthead seabream, the European seabass and rainbow trout, and we are working to release the FEEDNETICS for Atlantic salmon and the Nile tilapia. And finally, how you can access FEEDNETICS. Well, FEEDNETICS is a web app, and we'll see the looks of it with the Philippe Soares session tomorrow. And we have a special license for the academia, offering two types of license: a single user license and an institutional license in case you have more users. Also, we previewed an R&D project consortium for the cases where you might want to use the tool in a project and you have users from multiple institutes. So regarding the overall concept, this is mainly it. If you have questions, again, please use the button for the Q&A, and we'll happily address those today after Luis' talk. In between, just let me thank you for those that already replied to the poll about what current modeling tools you use. And after Luis' talk, we will launch the poll for those that are interested in registering for the 3-day trial of the FEEDNETICS. So with no more delays, I will stop sharing my screen and give the spotlight to Luis.
Okay, thank you, Ana, for the introduction. So I will show to you some use cases to demonstrate to you what is the potential of FEEDNETICS for academic uses. And we will base this presentation on 3 use cases. We could do many more. We have selected some which we thought you might find interesting. So one will go about methionine dose response trial. One about follow-up of trials using novel feeds and emerging ingredients, and one evaluating marginal changes in digestibility and making predictions in the long term. The 3 use cases will have a common structure. I will start by defining an objective, then insert the inputs, then explain how we run the predictions, and then compare the results. And this is basically the same structure that you will have to use when you are using FEEDNETICS, and you will recognize it's a common structure for people working in research as well. So it will be not particularly new to you. So the first use case, the methionine dose response trial. We use the seabass as the model species, and we wanted to evaluate the performance and see if it was possible to refine the design of such a trial or reduce the number of trials. And in this trial, so we use seabass as a model species, as I said, and we have to define in FEEDNETICS the trial conditions, and then we have the initial weight of 10 grams. We have the 350 fish per tank, a mortality rate of 1% per day, and we assume the constant temperature of 22 degrees. And when it comes to the feeds, so we tested the four feeds, changing in the methionine level from 0.65 to 1.5% of feed basis. And the only thing that changed in the diets was the methionine level at the expense of wheat meal. All the other ingredients were the same. So the 4 diets had the same crude protein, 44%, the same crude fat, 16%. The digestibility coefficients was also assumed to be the same for the 4 diets. The amino acid profile in the diets, it was meeting all the known requirements for seabass, so was the fatty acid profile. And feeding was defined as a feeding table based on fish size and temperature, which was fixed in this case. So then once we have done that, we could run the predictions, and we predicted for a period of 3 months the use of these 4 diets at the constant temperature of 22 degrees, as I said. And from there we could see what would be the results. And I mean, this was a trial for 3 months, and I can tell you that the computation time it took to simulate all these 4 diets was about 15 minutes, and it took us about 1 hour to input all the data into the simulation. So in 1.5 hours we have the results, while if we do a trial we have to wait 3 months plus the analytic time, plus the analysis. So these were the predictions that we got. The final weight was the same or very similar for 3 of the diets, but the diet below 0.85% of methionine was led to a fish with a smaller final weight, with a higher FCR, with the higher nitrogen waste, and also with a higher total solid waste. These are just some of the indicators that you can see from FEEDNETICS. There is many more, which Philippe will show you tomorrow in the presentation of the app, a few more of them. And so basically what we concluded was not a surprise. We know that from published work that the requirement for seabass is around 0.8 to 0.9 on feed basis, depending on the author and the method used, also a bit on the fish size. So we confirmed this study, and from these simulations we could also see that the 4 levels used, probably we could have got the same conclusion without the highest level, the 1.5% methionine. So what we can conclude is that we could have used only 3 trials and get the same results, which can be a relevant thing. I mean, these days we have to justify all our trial designs based on statistics and on ethical requirements which apply to all of us. So if we can do it with 3 instead of 4 treatments, it's a saving. So we respect one of the R's in the 3R principles that we are obliged to follow. Of course, another option would be we could say, okay, we can still use the four treatments, but instead of using the 1.5, we can use a level closer to the requirement, so we can fine tune what will be the requirement estimated with a bit more precision. So this is an example how FEEDNETICS can be used to refine experimental designs for research. The next use case goes about how the trials with novel feeds and testing emerging ingredients. And here we used an example using Gilthead seabream as the model species. And we wanted to test 4 diet formulations which were being studied under the Horizon 2020 GAIN project in which Sparrows participates. And here we wanted to compare a control diet based on a standard commercial type formulation with moderate levels of fish meal and fish oil. And we wanted to compare this with 3 alternative formulations based on ingredients which in theory have a higher sustainability profile and also have a good evaluation in terms of circularity, meaning that they promote the more efficient uses of resources. And so we had 3 diet formulations. The one we called the no-pap, in which we had a reduction in fish meal and fish oil, as in the other three, but here the fish meal and fish oil were replaced by insect meal, by single cell protein biomasses, by micro and macroalgae, and also by vegetable protein concentrates. In the PAP diet, we have a diet rich in processed animal proteins from terrestrial animal production, so poultry meal, blood meal, this kind of ingredients, and also vegetable protein concentrates. And the fourth formulation we call the mix. We have all of these ingredients, all these alternative and emerging ingredients, including insects, single cell biomasses, microalgae, vegetable protein concentrates, PAPs. So in terms of circularity of use of resources, this would probably be the best one. So in terms of inputs here, so we started with the fish of 55 grams of initial weight, 55 seabream in each tank, and a constant water temperature of 22 degrees. As this I will show you predictions, but also the experimental results from a trial that we did in practice, where that was done at the in a recycling system. So we have a constant temperature of 22 degrees. And these are the proximal composition of the four diets. As you see, the crude protein was around 43.5 in all four diets, crude fat around 18%. Digestibility coefficients, they differed slightly, and they were estimated based on the dietary ingredients, on known values for each of the ingredients that we were using in the formulation, and also for fat and so forth, and phosphorus. The amino acid profile that we used was estimated based on the dietary formulation as well, and the feeding that we considered for the predictions was exactly the same that were fed to the fish that were fed ad libitum in the zootechnical trial. So the feeding was based on feed quantity records, not on the feeding table in this case. So the trial and the predictions lasted for 77 days with the four diets at a temperature of 22 degrees, as I said. And here you can see the results for the four diets. And as you can see the points you see there are the measured values in the zootechnical trial, and the lines are the predicted values. So the starting point is the same. The rest is the prediction that the FEEDNETICS could obtain. And as you can see, for two of the diets, the control and the no PAP, the prediction was very good. We had a very good fit with the observed values. For the other two diets, for the PAP and for the mixed diet, there were some significant deviations, especially at the last sampling point. So this, in terms of overall performance, the four diets, they performed about the same. There were no significant differences in weight in the zootechnical trial, and the FCR was slightly worse in the PAP diet. What we could conclude from these simulations and from the deviations that we could obtain compared to the zootechnical trial is that probably the two formulations that you see in the lower panels, the PAP and the mixed, we may have faced an unknown effect due to nutritional factors. We didn't know of any, but we cannot exclude that possibility. Other possibility is that we would have a lower amino acid digestibility for some of the amino acids. Could have happened. We are checking on that analytically at the moment. Maybe the formulations, they were low in some of the macronutrients. According to what we have analyzed, and we have analyzed the common minerals and vitamins, this is not the case, but we cannot exclude completely that possibility. And the last possibility is that the model equations that we defined in FEEDNETICS, which in fact encapsulate the current knowledge on nutrition of seabream, maybe they do not work well for more extreme formulations. For some, they seem to work. For the control diets, they work. For the no PAP diet, they work. Maybe that's also the reason why. And maybe we have to refine further the algorithm for more extreme formulations. I should say that all these three test formulations that we used under the GAIN project, they are quite extreme compared to what is used today in the industry. And the last use case that I'd like to show you is some predictions we made to evaluate marginal changes in digestibility. And this was, we were looking for long-term effects, so almost a full production cycle. Also for the Gilthead seabream as the model species. And basically the only thing that was changing between the two diets that we tested was the digestibility of protein. And basically here we simulated a low fish meal diet, and the low fish meal diet containing an additive. We didn't define which additive it was. It could be a digestive protease, it can be a probiotic, a prebiotic, but this is simulating basically an improvement of only 2% in digestibility of protein. And all the other parameters would be different. All the other parameters would be the same. So the same formulation of the feeds, the same crude protein, same crude fat. Of course, the additive has a cost. So the adding the additive to the feed brings a 1 cent cost per kilo. And when we run the simulations, we consider the initial size of 50 grams and 150,000 fish per cage in this case, a mortality rate of 0.7 per month. And we used an actual temperature profile, the average temperatures from the Alicante area in Spain. So basically temperatures slightly below 15 degrees in the winter and going up to 26.5 degrees in the summer. And we have run these simulations for a long period. So we run it for 18 months or up to 450 grams of size of the fish. And when we look at the results, what we see is that by giving the additive, just improving, simulating here an improvement of 2% in protein, crude protein digestibility, we could see that the fish would reach 450 grams about 18 days earlier than the control diet. So almost 3 weeks of gain. I mean, this may be significant or not for the farm, depends what they want. And we also see that we have a lower effect on effect in reducing the FCR by using this additive. The economic feed conversion ratio was also, despite that the feed was slightly more expensive, the cost of feeding would be lower because we would use less feed, and also per ton of biomass production or biomass gain, we would reduce also the waste emission both in total solids and total nitrogen. So overall, the main conclusion here was that by improving marginally the protein digestibility, we can have a saving on feed of 60 euro per ton of fish produced. So this is an example how we can use FEEDNETICS to demonstrate that a small effect may pay off and may even bring some small benefits to a fish farmer in this case. So this was the last use case I had to show you. I mean, of course, we could show you 10 or 20. Actually, the limit for the scenarios you can test in FEEDNETICS is your curiosity. And we hope that you will use this tool in the future and find it a good tool for your research. I should stress that FEEDNETICS is a tool, a prediction tool. It will never replace fish nutritional trials. We still will have to do plenty of trials if we want to improve feeding and nutrition in fish, but we believe that this can be a good tool to make your research more efficient.
Thank you very much, Luis. Now, a lot of people have answered the first poll. After Luis' talk, I mentioned we were going to launch the registration poll, and which I'm doing now. And after these two talks, by now you have an idea with these use cases that Luis showed, have an idea about what you can do with the FEEDNETICS. And tomorrow, Tomé will give us more details about the model, and Philippe will give us the live tour. And so for today, the talks are done, and we are very happy to address the questions that have been raised. And for that, I will give the spotlight to Philippe Soares that will moderate this Q&A session. Go ahead, Philippe.
Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Ana.
Perfectly.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you. So now, as Ana said, for this last part of this session, we have about 20 minutes to answer some of your questions. I see that we have already a total of 3 questions in the Q&A section, but again, if you have further questions, please feel free to write them down in the Q&A section. So the first one comes from Caroline Kentbet and says the following. Would I be able to formulate experimental diets with varying levels of methionine plus cysteine? So instead of just measuring the methionine requirements, could I include cysteine as a factor? Tomé, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah. If I understood the question correctly, let's say in real life, the apparent requirement of methionine will depend on the amount of cysteine that you include, due to the fact that there's interconversion of production of cysteine from methionine. The model does model that, so if you simulate a trial with different levels of methionine at different levels of cysteine as well, you will get different results. I don't know if that addresses your question. If not, you can just create a new question.
Okay, thank you, Tomé. We have another question, a second one from Caroline also. So it says the following. Does the applied model of FEEDNETICS also predict an overdose of amino acids and potential impacts on growth, especially sulfur amino acids? I see that you, Tomé, you would like also to answer to this question.
Sure. The model does not, answering briefly, the model does not explicitly model toxicity or overdose effects, but it would, of course, show some diminishing return effect, like you would expect from any nutrient. Of course, if you increase the amount of sulfur amino acids up to a point where it starts interfering with the overall amino acid profile, then you might see some, not necessarily overdose or toxicity effects, but some imbalance effects. So trying to answer your question, no, it does not predict that. But in general, since supplementing with very high toxicity levels, amount of amino acids would be also expensive, it's not likely that people, I assume that people would want to work in practice at such supplementation levels.
Okay, thank you, Tomé. Thank you, Tomé. Okay, let me just choose another question, and this one goes to Luis Conceição and comes from Sivagurun Nathan. Sorry if I misspelled your name, and says the following. It is applicable for Gilthead seabream larvae, the FEEDNETICS model?
I mean, FEEDNETICS was developed and calibrated and validated for juvenile fish, juvenile and adult fish. So we have not calibrated it for larvae. So at the moment, we know that simulations with fish over 5 grams, they are accurate, and I think we have run simulations down to 2 grams, and it's not fully validated, but the results seem to be valid as well, down to 2 grams. But below that, we cannot say if it's applicable or not. But yes, this can be studied in the future. But it would require a calibration and a validation for the larvae. The difficult thing with the larvae is that, I mean, one thing, Tomé will explain a bit more in detail the algorithm tomorrow, how the FEEDNETICS simulations are generated. But one thing it's clear that the feed intake is a major drive in the results of FEEDNETICS. So if the fish will eat more, you will tend to see a higher growth, and then it can be more or less efficient depending on the diet, of course. But for the Gilthead seabream for larvae, that's a problem that we have when we work in larval nutrition. It's very difficult to estimate how much the fish have eaten. We can only guess, and not much more than that. So I would be cautious in using such a tool for seabream larvae or other larval species. But we may work on that in the future.
Filipe, estás em mute.
Sorry.
Sorry, you are muted.
Thank you, Ana. Yeah. So moving to the next question, and this one comes from Carlos Andrade, and it's a very interesting one. Are these static models or learning models? Do they adapt with results over time being included in the models? I think that tomorrow he will also explain a bit more of the modeling approach behind FEEDNETICS, but Tomé, if you want to just say something about it.
Yes, very briefly, if I understood the question, they are static models in the sense that you cannot even introduce your own results as it is. You can only do predictions. Then you have your own results and you can compare them on your own side. Of course, we are continuously, this is not a static product or a static model in the sense that it's not changing. The model itself is being improved, and all the models that we work with are being improved over time and recalibrated with more data in order to always improve the quality of the models. But yeah, in a nutshell, it does not automatically adapt to your own results. That's something that we would have to do. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Tomé. So moving to the next question, and this one comes from Manuel Gesto, and says the following: does the software include any parameter for strain-related differences for species? For example, strains showing better growth at higher or lower temperature? Ana, Luis, or Tomé, which one of you would like to answer this one?
I can answer as well.
Thank you, Tomé.
The software has parameters that could account for strain-related differences, but then we have to have, imagine, for a given species, if it's different strains of seabass, we need to have data specific for each strain, and then we would have a calibration for a specific strain, and then another different calibration for a different strain. So yes, it can account for strain-related differences, but the current version of the software only has species-wise calibrations. We do not have yet any strain-specific calibrations. Hopefully that addresses the question.
If I can add something, just very briefly, we do have the possibility to carry out custom calibrations, but for that, that is beyond the normal license, and it requires a lot of data. So just to add to my comment.
Thank you, Ana. So the next question, and this one goes to Luis Conceição, and comes from Dariel Tovar, and says the following: does the model predict the impact of feed additives, such as probiotics and/or prebiotics? So Luis, can you please answer this question? You are muted, Luis. Can you please unmute your mic?
Yes, sorry for that. Yes, hello, Daniel. Thank you for the question. FEEDNETICS it's a model, so it's a simplification of what is happening in a fish, and it's a nutritional model. At the moment, it does not include any. You cannot include any effects of vaccines or probiotics unless you can predict what are the, or you can define what are the effects. I mean, if you have a probiotic that you know that will improve the digestibility of protein, or that will affect the digestibility of phosphorus or other nutrients, or affect the feed intake, then you can use FEEDNETICS, but not the health effect per se. So FEEDNETICS does not predict health effects; it predicts only the nutritional effects. So basically, effects that happen at the level of feeding and processing of the nutrients through the intermediary metabolism. But Tomeo will explain that a bit more tomorrow in his presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Luis. So moving to the next question, this one comes from Ramiro Neves and says the following. I have missed a couple of slides. Sorry if my question was answered during the presentation, but okay. Have you done tests to fish taste as a function of the food? And I think that's Luis Conceição. You would like to answer this one as well?
Yes, I mean, in FEEDNETICS, as it is today, I mean, feed intake, it's an input, it's not output. So basically, you have to tell the software how much the fish will eat, either explicitly or as a feeding table, okay? In the future, we would like to include also a prediction of feeding, but that it's a challenging issue, and maybe in one day we can do that. But at the moment, we cannot. We cannot. The model is not predicting how much the fish will eat, but can evaluate what will be the effect of taste enhancer in metabolism. So if you know that a certain taste enhancer will improve the feeding of the fish by 10%, then you can see what is the effect of that in fish growth, in waste production, and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Okay, so the next question comes from Reda Saleh and says the following. Could you think in the future the FEEDNETICS, after further improvements, could be sufficient to substitute the in vivo trial and accepted in international publications? Okay, this is a good one. Which one of you would like to answer this?
I can answer it.
Thank you, Tomeo.
The way I see it, I mean, it depends on how much confidence the model evokes, let's say. But I would not recommend that you completely replace an in vivo trial by a simulation. In fact, we consider that simulations are more useful as a complement to in vivo trials. An example is, currently, if you run a trial, imagine with a certain feed with a certain additive, and you get a growth of SGR of 2, without context, without having a control diet, without having something, you don't know if this SGR, if this growth rate is good or it's bad. You cannot really, it's difficult to evaluate the effect of such an additive. If you have a model that you can simulate, what would I be expecting when I feed the fish with this diet, given the composition of this diet in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients and so on? Then you have this reference, and you know that the fish should have displayed a certain specific growth rate of, imagine, 1.5, and you measured with your diet, with your additive, 2. That means that the additive somehow increased the specific growth rate of fish, and you can say this even without having an actual control diet. So answering your question, the way we see it, it should not be used as a way to replace in vivo trials. It should be a way of complementing them, and also of helping you formulate the correct hypothesis, so that you actually start by not replacing in vivo trials, but choosing better what in vivo trials you actually want to do. That's the way we see it.
Yes, and also another possibility that you have in following what Tumei is saying, as a complementing tool to in vivo trials. Let's say we run an in vivo trial to test an additive during a period of 3 months, and you see that there is a slight improvement in growth performance, but you'd like to, to estimate if this would be kept in time. What you can do is to extend the, let's say, the trial period using a simulation. Okay, but of course for this you have to convince the reviewer that the model is accurate, and we are working on that in having some and in publishing the model validation so that this can be used and more easily acceptable by reviewers.
Okay, thank you to me and Luis. We have a few more questions over here, I think 2 more at least. So the next one comes from Marwa McLaughlin and says the following: it is also possible to predict effect of vaccines containing fatty acids on fish health. And I think that's you, Luis. You would like to answer this one as well?
Yes, this question in a way it's similar to the one that I answered a bit earlier from Dariel Tovar, and basically, we cannot predict effects on fish health. We can predict effects on the fish nutrition related parameters. So FEEDNETICS basically predicts effects on growth, on body composition, on waste output. Doesn't go further than that. Of course, in the future, either FEEDNETICS or other predictive models can try to do that, to predict effects on fish health, but for that we must reach a level of knowledge on what are the exact effects of the vaccines in the fish metabolism that I don't think we have it today. So to build the model, we have to represent all the knowledge that we have into equation. But that's what we have done in terms of nutrition. For the health part, I think it's much more challenging, and I hope we or someone else can do it in the future.
Okay, thank you, Luis. Let me see more questions. So I think, okay, the next one comes from Ana Paula and says the following. Okay, so Ana Nobre said that tilapia will be soon included in FEEDNETICS. Will it be possible to make predictions for tropical environmental conditions as well as ingredients? Okay, so maybe Anna, could you answer this one?
Yes. So the concept here in the Tumei will give a bit more in-depth tomorrow about the modeling concept, but the idea is that the model works within the ranges, either temperature or the macronutrients range that are included in the trials that were based, that were used to do the calibrations. And so for tilapia, the trials are normally done within the tropical, let's say, conditions. And of course, for you to be able to use these models in a wider context, which is normally the production context, of course, we need to have also trials that are a bit broader. And to answer shortly, yes, you can. It's possible. It will be possible to make predictions for the tropical environmental and the typical diets that are used for tilapia.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, so we have at least one more question or 2 more questions, and so another one from Caroline, which says the following: did you use research from the international science community, example peer-reviewed, to build the models for the different species? Okay, so which one of you would like to answer this one?
I can answer.
You too, ma'am. Okay, thank you.
Obviously, in terms of the model design, we did not invent the wheel. Most of what were modeling in terms of metabolism, feeding behavior, whatever. All those things are based on the information that has been studied and that has been published in peer-reviewed journals. The specific structure of the model itself, it was developed by us, so that was not necessarily taken from peer-reviewed public research. And then the data that we use to calibrate the submodels and the model overall is a combination of, again, public data that's from the international science community, published in peer-reviewed journals, but also in a great degree, also a great amount of data that's our own internal data sets from our own trials. Hopefully that addresses the question.
Okay, thank you, Tomé. We have two more questions, or at least one more. It's not really related with the modeling approach or with the software, but more related with the webinar. From Jamie Oft. Will the slides be available outside of the webinar? Thank you. Anna, can you just answer this question, please?
So we will provide a recording of the webinar. So yes, they will be available.
Okay, thank you, Anna. So I see that there are no more questions so far, but we still have at least more 10 minutes to answer to some questions. So if you want to ask one or two more, we can wait 1 or 2 minutes. Otherwise, I'll give you the word, Anna, for the final remarks about this session.
Okay. Okay, so it looks like that all the questions are answered. Oh, it's coming another one. So.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Rita. This comes from Rita Teodosio and says the following: can you do a reserve approach? You say what is the output you want, and it will predict the approximate composition of your diet. Interesting one. So maybe Tomé, can you answer this question, please?
Sure, that's a good question. The current version of FEEDNETICS is not able to do that, but that's something that we have in the development pipeline, let's say, to be able to define what's your target, how big you want the fish to grow up to a certain level, or some sort of optimization criteria, and then the model will tell you what's the optimal composition of the diet, or how much the optimal amount that you should feed to the fish, and so. So answering your question, it cannot do that, but that's something we are working on. So hopefully that answers your question.
Can I add something? So just like Tomé was mentioning, if you have an optimization version, we will be able to do that. When you say in terms of you define the output, if you mean by output the gross, we also have another tool, nutritional tool, that based on the gross that you set as a target, we can estimate the requirements, but that's another tool, and that's just for gross. But we expect to have developments regarding the use of the FEEDNETICS for such optimizations that you are asking.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Okay, I think we only have one more question that says, where is the model? Yeah, I think I can answer this one. So basically, as Luis and Ana Nobre already mentioned, FEEDNETICS is implemented as a web application. Tomorrow we'll have the opportunity to take a quick tour over FEEDNETICS so that you can get a clear perception of what it consists of. So if tomorrow you'll be available, you can get a perception of this application and this software. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think all the questions are answered, and so we would like to thank you all. If there is any question that was not properly addressed, we still have tomorrow. And just to remind you, tomorrow we'll have Tume giving more details about the modeling approach, and then Philippe will give an idea, a practical idea of how the web app looks like. We look forward to have you with us tomorrow. And also, if you have other questions, you also can send us an email. So I think that's all for today. It was a very interesting session with a lot of questions. And thank you very much, and see you tomorrow.